Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a source text that argues something honestly pretty radical. It claims that the very way we categorize people fundamentally distorts our entire understanding of history. We're going to explore how drawing lines between groups, whether that's by nationality, race, or ethnicity, might actually be a massive trap, a trap that keeps us from seeing how the world truly operates. So let's just jump right in with a massive question about how the narratives of our past are constructed. What if the history books you've read are actually shielding the real engines of human conflict? What if the wars and struggles we've been told are about one nation fighting another or one ethnic group clashing with another are actually masking a much deeper structural truth? To wrap our heads around this paradigm shift, we're going to hit 5 key areas. First, the architecture of distinction. Then we'll look at some strange images in science, uncover the true engines of history, deconstruct the mechanics of war, and finally, dive into the sociology of historiography. Let's get to it. All right, starting with part 1, the architecture of distinction and its epistemological weight. Drawing lines between groups of people, it's never just some simple administrative task. The source argues that categorization doesn't just passively label reality, it actively constructs it. When a historian draws a boundary to define a group, they dictate exactly how we understand cause and effect. It determines whether we see the actual root causes of a conflict or whether we're left totally blind, just endlessly treating the symptoms. Now look at the profound contrast between these two approaches. On one hand, you've got identity-based distinctions, things like race, nationality, or religion. The text argues these are often arbitrary labels that obscure the objective drivers of history. But on the other hand, socioeconomic and power-based frameworks give us a genuinely grounded, rigorous lens for analyzing human hierarchy and agency. Moving right along to part 2, strange images in science and the distortion of reality. To really grasp this, let's take a quick detour into the hard sciences because it perfectly illustrates the cross-disciplinary danger of making these distinctions. For instance, in math, the moment you draw a line between 0 and 1, you basically have to invent complex concepts like infinity just to make the system work. Or in physics, when you separate the measuring equipment from the surrounding environment, you're practically forced to conclude that particles exist within a space-time construct. The boundary you draw literally dictates the reality you see. So, here's the crucial takeaway. When analytical lines are drawn arbitrarily or incorrectly, they create anomalies. The source text has a great term for this. It calls them strange images, or in Dutch, rare beelden. These strange images completely mask the underlying truth. They trap the observer in a conceptual reality that just doesn't match the fundamental mechanics of the world. And when you apply this concept to history, wow, you see how dangerous these strange images can really be. If you divide people along ethnic or national lines, say Germans versus Jews, you end up in a historical hall of mirrors. It treats identity as the primary cause of conflict. But if you flip the script to a materialist view, you suddenly see identity for what it truly is, a secondary tool that gets manipulated by those in power. A materialist approach cuts right through the illusion to reveal the actual structural tensions. Which brings us to part 3, the true engines of history, where we redefine our analytical frameworks. So if identity is a trap, what on earth should we be using? Well, according to the analysis, if we want to do real, rigorous history, we have to drop the superficial labels and rely strictly on 4 material constraints. First, wealth dynamics, riches versus poverty. Second, labor relations, employers versus employees. Third, power structures, separating the Max-Trebers or the power holders from everybody else. And finally, ecological realities, the relationship between humanity and the environment. These are the categories that define the actual lived experience of hierarchy and resource distribution. The analysis makes a really bold claim here. It suggests that national and racial categories are academically insufficient because they pull off a massive double deception. First off, they completely hide the incredibly shared experiences of the rest of humanity across borders. And second, and this is the really insidious part, they create this totally false sense of unity between a country's elite and its everyday citizens. Just listen to this quote because it really challenges some deeply held assumptions. It proposes that global elites, the Macht-Trebers, actually have way more in common with each other, even across enemy lines, than they do with the everyday people they govern. Let that sink in. Their material interests align with other power holders, absolutely not with the citizens they eventually lead into conflict. On to part 4, deconstructing mechanisms of war, looking at accountability and blame. When we apply this rigorous socioeconomic lens to the ultimate human conflict, war, things get chillingly clear.
Stripped of its nationalistic, strange images, war is just a machine run by power holders, and they operate this machine using three specific instruments. One, they strategically exploit the inhabitants. Two, they deploy the psychological theater of propaganda. And three, they utilize weaponry. Notice how everyday inhabitants are listed right alongside the weapons?
Because of this, the ethical duty of a historian, and really for all of us consuming history, is to resist the urge to blame the inhabitants. They are simply mobilized tools, manipulated through coercion and intense psychological propaganda. I mean, you wouldn't blame a rifle for starting a war, right? The text argues you absolutely shouldn't blame the everyday citizens who are drafted to hold it, either.
This means that viewing history through an identity-based lens is just fundamentally flawed. If you blame the Germans, or the Russians, or the Americans, you're diffusing the blame across millions of people who have literally zero power. And what does that do? It effectively shields the true architects of the conflict, the rulers, from any real accountability.
And finally, Part 5, the sociology of historiography, where we look at financial interests and power. So you might be wondering, if this materialist truth makes so much sense, why is it so often hidden from public view? Well, what the text sharply calls the sociology of historiography gives us the answer. Scholars face massive financial and political pressures. If a historical analysis challenges how wealth is distributed today, it loses its funding. If it attacks power dynamics directly, it gets suppressed. So naturally, there's a huge professional preference to fall back on identity-based blame. It's just safer. The analysis concludes that this isn't just some innocent academic oversight. It's a systemic, professional betrayal. By keeping the public totally focused on race or nationality, the historical profession avoids challenging the legitimacy of the status quo. And in doing so, it perfectly preserves the interests of the elite power holders. This next quote is a massive call to action. It argues that modern scholarship must be consciously subversive. To be a true seer of power dynamics, historians, and honestly all of us, have to actively reject the convenient, distorting labels society pushes on us so heavily. We have to recognize that those labels are literally designed to serve the powerful. By shifting our focus entirely to the dynamics of wealth, labor, and power, we can finally strip away those strange images that have clouded our understanding of history for centuries. The true responsibility of historical analysis is to maintain a record of structural truth, breaking down the myths that protect the architects of war. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. The next time you read about a historical conflict, or even a modern one, try to look past the flags and the identity labels. Ask yourself, who is actually holding the power here, and who truly benefits from the narrative you are consuming today? Keep looking for that structural truth.